Welcome to the Mom to Mom Mentoring Podcast, where we encourage and equip kingdom-minded moms to live powerfully, lead with purpose, and love with passion. I'm your host, Misty Hughes, a certified life and leadership coach, speaker, and fellow mom, navigating the beauty and challenges of faith, family, and my calling. I created this podcast to offer you real conversations and trusted wisdom with other mom mentors, because no mom should walk alone on this journey, especially when it comes to navigating complex relationships. Now, today's guest is someone whose story and mission will speak deeply to your heart. Kim Damon is the founder of Midlife Discoveries, Worthy Moms, and the host of the Midlife Worthy Moms podcast.
The last statistics they did, unfortunately, 26% families deal with some sort of estrangement. That's a huge percentage. I was estranged off and on with my mother in my younger years. I didn't want any of her harsh advice. I didn't want any of her criticism, and I didn't have a good relationship with her. And I honestly didn't think it would happen to me. But I found myself with my kids in and out of low contact for about 10 years.
Kim is a certified life coach and an Enneagram coach who helps midlife moms find healing and connection in difficult or even estranged relationships with their grown children. Kim knows firsthand the heartbreak and hope that comes with parenting adult kids. Her own experiences of estrangement led her to a place of healing, faith, and now a powerful purpose. Her superpower? Faith in the journey. Kim believes that every part of her story, even the hard times, was divinely woven to equip her to do what she loves the most, helping you rediscover your worth and rebuild broken relationships. Whether you are a mom wanting to heal the relationship with your mom, or a mom wanting to bridge the gap with your adult children, this episode is full of the wisdom, the grace, and the practical encouragement that you are looking for. For that mom who might feel unseen, unheard, or even unsure of how to move forward in these relationships. And if you're listening today thinking, oh, that's me, I need this kind of support, I invite you to book a free clarity call with me. Sometimes all it takes is one honest conversation to begin shifting from confusion to clarity. Mom, you weren't meant to carry this alone. Now, let's dive in to this life-giving conversation with Kim Damon. Kim, your business is based on Romans 12:2. Can you talk about why this is your business goal and what it has to do for your life?
Well, it really is about renewing my mind in Christ every day, every moment, living in the present, and also just not following what everybody says we should do. We need to understand what works for our families, and we need to do it in a way that amplifies the way that Jesus wants us to live. For example, he wants us to be kind, even when we don't feel very kind. So that is just how I want to live my life and also run my business.
Kim, you help moms navigate relational tension with their adult children, maybe even estrangement. I remember as a young mom not having a great relationship with my mom. Then I was married and had 2 girls. And talk about fear, because I did not want my relationship with my girls to end up like my relationship was with my mom. And I have a feeling that's probably a concern of some of the moms that are listening to this. They're that worry that their relationship with their kids will mirror that theirs with their parents. And so, why is this such a common fear and so big?
The last statistics they did, unfortunately, 26% families deal with some sort of estrangement. Now, most of those are dads, so I just want to make that clear. But that's a huge percentage. And I know just like you, I was estranged off and on with my mother in my younger years. I didn't want any of her harsh advice. I didn't want any of her criticism, and I didn't have a good relationship with her. And I honestly didn't think it would happen to me, but I found myself with my kids in and out of low contact for about 10 years. And I honestly thought I had done everything to stop that from happening. I believe that there are some things that we can do, but there's no way to completely shield ourselves. This has been going on for a long time, right? I mean, we just look back at Cain and Abel. I mean, you could even go back to Adam and Eve if you wanted to, right? Family estrangement has been around for a very long time.
That's a good point about Adam and Eve. They hid
Yes.
from the perfect father. So the fear is real. And you said, even though you didn't think it was going to be a problem, I was afraid it was going to be a problem. And the cycle repeated itself. Like
Yeah.
in your life, it did repeat itself in my life. I was estranged from my two daughters at different seasons of their life as well. So obviously, there was something that was potentially affecting our parenthood as we were parenting. So, how do these childhood patterns, these things that we grow up in, shape the way that we parent?
I look at what my daughter and my son are doing now in their parenting, and it's different. Every generation is different. And we're not going to parent the same. We're just not. And it's okay. There's also some other things that I think contributed to this estrangement. And part of it has to do with not really validating young people. And I believe, my own personal opinion is the younger people, the millennial parents, are doing a much better job validating their young children's emotions than even, let's say, you or I did when we were younger. Because we grew up in a baby boomer or Gen X where it's like, you just need to put your bootstraps on and get with the program. We don't have time for these side feelings. There are, I would say, 5 different types of estrangement. So you could be in the very beginning stages of it, just when they leave home and there's this awkwardness going on. There's a little bit of estrangement happening.
Yeah. And you're wondering, how do I even relate to this person now? I know my kids wondered the same thing. How do I relate to mom? Do I have to call her every day? Do I not call her every day? And they're trying to determine who they are as an individual. A lot of that's a natural process into adulthood.
When we carry our, I would say, expectations with it, those unspoken expectations, and they don't have the same expectations. So there's no discussion, there's just these unspoken expectations. And those really create a lot of division within the family. If we could have a discussion like, Mom, don't wait up for me, or hey, son, I'm going to worry if you're not home. Can you call me if you're going to be past 2 o'clock?
This estrangement or the first phase sounds like a natural separation. Our kids are going to leave. An estrangement can widen or the gap become more profound depending on how we, as the parent, handle this. So, I'd really like to help empower young moms with tools and thoughts to think about. So, one thing that you talked about was the validation.
Yeah.
What does healthy validation of our children look like?
Well, it looks like a conversation. It looks like a curious conversation that you have with your kids. And you can start this very young. If they come home and they're crying or they're feeling bad because somebody's picking on them at school, instead of automatically making some sort of judgment or giving them advice or telling them what to do, telling them not to worry or don't cry, instead say, wow, how are you feeling about that? And we
Mm.
can even do this with our adult kids. Like, how is that going for you? What are you going to do? What do you want to do? You can even say this to someone that's in kindergarten. What do you want to do when you go back to school tomorrow and you see Johnny on the playground? When we give advice, it's really saying, hey, I don't trust your judgment, so I'm going to tell you what to do. Our kids want to be trusted.
Gotcha. So a validating conversation isn't blowing smoke up their butt.
No.
It is giving them space to think and
Yeah.
be a human being.
Problem solve at a very young age. And it's
Uh,
also telling them, hey, I trust you to make the right decisions because I've taught you.
This is so interesting and reminds me of something we are talking about in our church. We are going through First Samuel and we're just on the first and second chapter. But if you remember in that story, Hannah, the mother of Samuel, takes him to the temple and literally gives him to Eli to raise right after he was weaned at a very young age. And our pastor has been talking about what she, as a mother, was able to impart to him through those first, I don't know, 5, maybe 6 years of his life, where she could then trust him to make those decisions because of what she had taught him. That's crazy, right? We would never think of doing that, but yet there is something profound in that story about the power that we have to nurture this decision-making ability in our children and not always be trying to fix it or give them the advice they need.
Now, obviously, if we need to give advice to a small child or a young child, we can do that. But it's always best to see if they have thought through any of this. I look back at my relationship with my own mother when she was giving me advice instead of asking or instead of validating what I was going through. I had this emotion like I felt rejected. And that just reinforced the belief that I wasn't doing well. I wasn't doing well as a mother. So, one of the things that I would do, definitely do, starting at teenage years especially, is to say, do you need to vent with me right now? Do you need to share this? Or do you need mom's advice right now? What a beautiful way to open up a conversation. And I still use this with my kids.
Last week's episode, number 51, was an interview with Danica Laporte called Defining Healthy, Happy Mother Adult Daughter Relationships. And it was all about this very thing. It was a raw, honest mother daughter type of conversation where we asked each other hard questions. This term that you're using, a validating conversation, is a really important concept for closing that estrangement gap between mothers and the adults that they raised.
When you validate the emotion, you're giving them permission to feel the way that they feel. Then they feel understood. You're giving them space to make that connection to a solution.
What other tools or things might moms do while their kids are still in the home that can create a space for a healthy relationship when their kids become adults?
I think it's just about communication and setting healthy boundaries. Talk about what it means to set healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are not ultimatums. So, for example, if you have to set a boundary with your child, your small child, then set a boundary, a loving boundary that says, hey, this has to happen or this is the consequence. And so a loving boundary always comes with a consequence. And when we start doing that, we open up the ability to have that mutual respect between our child and us. Because I was raised, it's my way or no way. And I think a lot of us were. A lot of the baby boomers and Gen X's will probably agree with that. Then communicate that boundary. Always communicate that boundary and encourage your child to communicate it. We draw that line in the sand without even saying a word. And mom doesn't even know she's crossing it. And so, if we encourage our kids at a young age to communicate their own loving boundaries, then we will see that foundation already set when they get older and they have boundaries in their marriage and they don't want mom dropping by unannounced, or they don't want mom giving them advice on how to raise the kids,
Mhm.
that sort of thing, because they've already communicated it.
Something I learned, gosh, 30 years ago. I had a really good friend that kind of pounded it in my head when you talk about the consequences. She would say, these are the consequences of their choices. These are the consequences of their choices.
Mhm.
And, to be able to communicate to that on the front end, here will be the consequences of your choice should you not honor this boundary. It's so powerful, and I think, it's so hard to follow through on the consequences.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely. And but I think again, when they can trust you with your consequences that you've laid out for them, that's freeing for them. They know where they stand. They
Mhm.
know what to expect. I think it's freedom when we know our consequences.
Yeah, it is. It is, and we get to choose. You're talking about building a trusting relationship by communication, by validation. So, what can help a mom shift out of that fear-based, fix it mom into a trusting mom that can communicate clearly?
Yeah, obviously that's going to take a lot of practice, right? Because we're not just going to change overnight. One of the things I do when I slip up is I just use humor with my kids. I gave that example earlier of telling my daughter to put on her coat, and I just laughed. Is the minute I said it, I knew that I shouldn't have said it. And of course, there's no take back. So instead of beating myself up and ruminating over it and having her be upset with me, I just spoke out loud and I said, "Wow, that was really inappropriate. I think you're old enough to know if you need a coat or not." So it's just really acknowledging that and understanding too that we don't have to agree with them to validate that they had emotions. Of course, they had emotions right then and there. Okay. You could say, "You must have been very frustrated. Tell me more about what happened." And we can stay very curious and learn a lot about the situation. Now, we can correct them later. What it does is it opens up the dialogue to learn more that we may not have learned if we had just jumped to the punishment. It works great with adults too. I don't have to agree with their choices. So I can just simply say, I imagine that you felt like you had a difficult decision to make. Why did you make that one? Just share with me, I'm just curious.
What might be some habits for a mom that she might try to incorporate to begin to make this shift from the fix it mom into more validating, communicating?
I think the first thing is to always ask for permission before you give any advice. And I always say that filtering all of this through the end game, and the end game is to teach our children autonomy, to teach them how to be productive individuals out there in the world. So I want them to think this through. I don't want to think it through for them.
You're really helping that helicopter mom out there, right? The one that's hovering over everything. I'd like to talk about bridging that gap when there is estrangement. You said there's 5 types or levels of estrangement.
Yes, there are 5 levels. First, you have, like, this little bit of a detachment stage where, hey, they're just going out into the world and they're doing their own thing. They're getting a job, they're figuring things out, they're showing their independence. That would just be the first level. It's not necessarily estrangement as we know it, but that's when we start to panic. We start to panic. Even in those early stages, that's why it's so important to start now with all of these tools that I teach, because if you don't, you may go further. So let's talk about the second
Yeah.
stage. That's when they meet somebody else. And that person becomes the center of the world instead of mom. That is a tough time for mom, even though she doesn't realize it right now. Like, I couldn't wait. I thought I was going to be the best mother in law ever. And I turned out to be one of the worst in the beginning. I think it's really important to understand that they are going to pull away at this time, and their allegiance to traditions and opinions are going to shift over towards the new person instead of their family. Then we have what we call low contact, which is okay, now they're off doing their thing. They have trouble being around mom or dad because of opinions, because of our politics don't align. This is the stage that I stayed in for a very long time, in and out of, where you feel very awkward even talking to them. It's like pulling teeth, even getting them to talk to you.
So the word I think of is kind of an avoidance.
Yes.
They're avoiding being in your space. They're avoiding spending time with you. All right, let's keep going.
Okay. Number 4 is
Or
actually for estrangement would be full no contact. And of course, there are certain ways that we can go about trying to connect with them, but this is really about mom stepping back and being responsible for her own happiness and not making her kids responsible for it, and her healing before she reaches out. And this is an important step that a lot of people miss. Like,
mm,
they just go on steroids and think, okay, if I send more text, if I send more letters, if I send more gifts, if I do all of these things, my kids will come back to me or they'll see my way. Or if I yell or cry or whatever the scenario is.
yeah, it's a little manipulative.
Yeah, I like to look at it as be feeling desperate. Like,
Desperate.
mom feels desperate, so she starts misbehaving. And I definitely felt desperate. And so I started behaving in ways that really were not aligned with who I am.
And then what happens after that?
Yeah, okay, so the fifth level of estrangement is actually the reconciliation.
Oh,
So I'm gonna say 81%. That's what the statistics say. 81% will reconcile in their lifetime. However, sometimes we get this euphoric feeling. Oh, we've reconciled, everything is fine. Now we're in contact. And that is when we really need to manage our minds, and we really need to pay close attention to how we're talking to our kids, because it's going to be uncomfortable. Honestly, it is just going to be uncomfortable.
mm,
And so this reconciliation is a little like being in low contact. Like, those are both two really important stages, but nevertheless, I think a lot of people overlook it
mhm,
because they think everything's going to be back to normal.
yeah. So for the young mom who's hearing this and she's going, "Oh my gosh, that's what my mom did," or "That's where we're at." How can she help herself and maybe even help her mom through that?
I think that the first thing that they want to do is they want to avoid it, and I get it because I'm a major avoider, or I was until doing this work. But, avoiding the problem conflict avoidance is like shoving a beach ball down into the water. Eventually, it's gonna get away from you, and it's gonna come out in different ways, maybe in your marriage, maybe in your relationships at work, maybe your relationships with your own children. And I like to think of this as how you do one thing is how you do everything in relationships. So, having said that, it's always a good idea to have the difficult conversations with mom and dad and try to do it with both of them. They have to set boundaries and they have to communicate them. So,
And so
that young person, if you want a relationship with your parents, you have to communicate the boundary and just let them have their emotions about it. They may not like it, that's fine, but go ahead and verbalize it.
how do we set boundaries with an emotionally challenging parent? Honor them.
Just like you do children, you give them a choice.
Okay.
It's that simple.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
mean, if it works, let me just say that when we're acting like this, and I have a word for it or a phrase, I'm in my toddler brain. So honestly, when I was misbehaving, I was no different than a 2-year-old. So, and I'm not saying treat me like a 2-year-old. I'm just saying that what works for a 2-year-old is setting a boundary with consequences so that they can make a choice.
I'm gonna just be honest here because I had to do some boundary setting with my mother when I was raising my kids, and I got a little mad about it because I felt like I had to be the parent. I wanted her to be the parent, and I was put in a position where I had to set the boundary so that we could have a relationship. It made me mad.
Yes, I would agree. Although this is where we get to step into just a place of compassion
Mm.
and be curious about why she's behaving like this.
Mm.
This gets into validating emotions again. You can just simply say, I've noticed this. What is going on? I've noticed that you're a little hostile. What is going on? Tell me what is happening. Just give them room to have the discussion. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that we are validating behavior. We're validating the emotion that they're having, not their behavior. Then asking, hey, what do you think is going to make this better?
I am so inspired by your genuine kindness and compassion toward all parties in a difficult situation and your desire to encourage them to come at it with curiosity and compassion. I had to grieve the loss of the mom I wanted.
Mhm.
And then I had to let myself be angry. So, I just remember I had to go through all the emotions before I could do what you're encouraging to do and step back into that relationship in a loving, compassionate way. Heck, my mom even moved in with us for a season.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
So, anyway, yeah, miracles happen.
That's right. They do happen. I just always say if 81% reconcile, just be one of the 81%.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what does healing look like if mom doesn't change or daughter doesn't change?
That's a good question. And again, I think that no matter what, we just have to lean on our faith and God. And I think it's in our, best interest to forgive anyway. Forgive when we're not being forgiven. And that can be really hard, but we're all called to forgive as we're forgiven. And really it's to our benefit because what we don't want to do is we don't want to end up with a bitter heart.
Kim, you have so much wisdom for moms of all ages. You've been there, done that. You've had to walk through this with your mom and then with your children. If some of our listeners want to get a hold of you to glean from your wisdom in a deeper way, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I would just love for you to visit my website, which is midlifediscoveries.com. And you can also look me up on Facebook on Worthy Moms. This is so important to kind of bring families together. And we're seeing a lot of spiritual warfare out there for many moms and kids with their parents. And I think that it's worth coming together and trying to find some sort of solution.
Yeah. In all of my years of going through different things with my kids, I would just always remember, God, you're a God of restoration, and family is your idea. So I don't know how it's going to look or when, where, how, why, how high, how low, but I just have to remember that He is the God who restores. And I had to allow Him to let your kingdom come. Let your kingdom come in my family, God, right? I want that restoration. But how do I posture myself to partner with the Lord in that? I have one more quick question to ask before we sign off today. If a mom listening today could do one thing this week to start transforming her relationship with her kids or her own mom, what is that one thing you would recommend?
Well, I would recommend praying and asking the Holy Spirit show you what you need to do because everybody's answer is going to be different. Some of us need to step into the relationship and stop avoiding, and some of us need to step away because we a little overreactive to it. I would ask Jesus for healing and forgiveness to take place. And maybe even some hard prayers
Mm.
like, do what it takes, Lord. I'm handing this over to you to solve this problem.
And my prayer is that this conversation will open some doors to healing of relationships and restoration of family. Kim, thank you. Thank you for showing up, not just with wisdom, but with such tenderness and truth. Your story is proof that redemption is possible and that moms really can reconnect with their kids, with their moms, and themselves. Now, as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with one thing. Validation changes everything. Whether you're showing up for your child or trying to extend grace to your mom, start by listening to understand, not to fix. Just that one shift can begin to build a bridge where there's been a wall. If this episode stirred something in you, you don't have to process it alone. Let's talk. Book your free clarity call with me today, and let's take the next step together. Just hop on over to momtomommentoring.com/call to get a time on my calendar. Until next time, Mama, remember, when you shine, you give others permission to shine too.